Hi, I'm Tom Neal from the Call to Learn conference. And today I'm interviewing my wife, Tresta. So Tresta, will you start out by just explaining how you got started, where we're from, everything about us that has to do with what we're talking about today?
All right. Well, really quickly, I was born in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. I grew up in New Mexico. My husband grew up in New Hampshire. I went to school at Ricks College, or BYU, Idaho. And then we met in Provo. I moved down and got a job in Provo, and we met in a nursing home where we...
Where she chased me around the nursing home.
Actually, he did.
Whatever.
Anyway, then I served a mission. And after my mission, you waited for me. And so we got married right shortly after I returned home. Yeah. And we didn't think we were going to have any children.
That's true.
And then we did. We were surprised. And they told us that it would be impossible for having children, but then we did. And we ended up with 8 total. And then,
so obviously it wasn't impossible.
Yeah. And you asked me to homeschool. And I said...
that went over real well. I remember that.
Yeah, I had friends that had homeschooled before, and I did not want to be like them at any stretch of the imagination, but like them. And plus, I wanted my kids to have a social life. I loved my social life in school, and I wanted them to have one too. So, yeah, that's about where we ended up, and then you asked me to go to...
And you thought we would not have social kids if we did homeschooling.
Oh, I did think that.
And I think that was obviously proven quite wrong.
Yes, quite wrong. They are too social.
I don't know about that.
But... they are very social. Yeah, so I started homeschooling, giving it a try for a little time period, and it worked.
But what convinced you to do it, though? It wasn't me.
No, it wasn't you. Sorry.
I know that. So tell them what convinced you.
Okay, so it was, I attended a conference. I didn't know anybody there. I went by myself, and I started asking, like, everybody sitting next to me. Everybody. I was like, so what do you do about socialization? What do you do about socialization? What do you do about socialization? It was a really big concern for me. And they're like, oh, you just put them into groups. You put them into... I'm like, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? So
did they talk about doing stuff like with music or anything, or choirs or anything?
No.
So they didn't know about them.
They didn't even have those back then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they kind of just brushed me off, and I kind of got ticked off. I was like, really, seriously? There's no answer to the socialization problem? We've got a problem.
So basically, what you're saying is they weren't worried about it. Apparently,
no, they weren't. Yeah, they weren't. But it was a concern for me. So then I started finding out any homeschoolers around me, and I called everybody I knew. Just, oh, they're homeschooling? Okay, give me their phone number. I got to call them. And then we moved to Utah. And when we moved to Utah, I found some friends to hang out with that were the same age as our boys. And we started hanging out. But it was the big reason that I wanted to in the very, very first place was that I had attended BYU, Idaho, and I went to the anatomy and physiology class, and it was so cool. Yeah. They put gospel in with anatomy and physiology so beautifully. I'm just like, oh, I want to always learn like this.
Well, I remember you used to say, you've told this before, that you had that one professor that would describe all this stuff about the human body, and then just turn to you guys and say, yeah, so what did he say?
He would always
I can't remember what he said.
He would always say, and remember, there's no God. We're like, how is that possible?
So
yeah, he did that constantly because it was really confusing. You know, the physiology of the body gets really complicated. And then he would say, and there's no God, right? Of course there is a God. But he talked about the Book of Mormon. He talked about how angels would fly. He talked about how they could come through the roof if just this and this and this change in our physiology. And I was like, I want to always learn like this. This is so rich and so pure.
And obviously so, if we sent them
to public school, they would never get it. Yeah. Well, I didn't know it, right? How could I teach it? Right. So that was my big concern next. I'm like, yeah, if my kids could learn this way, then I want to do it. But if I'm the teacher, we're in trouble.
Well, because plus I remember she used to tell me all the time, well, she'll tell you guys too, that she didn't think she was smart. She had 2 degrees from college, but you didn't think you were smart. So
no,
I can understand why you didn't think you could do it.
I believed that I wasn't smart. I believed that I couldn't
Right.
learn very well and that I was learning disabled and whatever you want to say, that I just I wasn't smart enough. So we moved into that 2-bedroom basement apartment, and when we had 6 children, and I thought, this is crazy. But it was perfect atmosphere for me to kind of hide away, only have me and my children only. And I started reading and reading and learning and loving it. And the kids started loving it. And I started writing curriculum and writing books and writing well, this is just as cool. As soon as they were learning something, I would make my learning journal too.
Right,
My
right.
learning journals, they had a notebook like this big for the year.
Right.
I had about 4 of them.
Right, I remember that. Well, and we purposely made it so they can't see them, but there's a whole bunch of them right up here.
Yes, that's
you
true.
have.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
those are just my newest ones.
well, and then out in the other room you have
Yeah.
a bunch, a whole case full of.
I once
notebooks.
counted them. There was over 63. I don't know how much we'd have
Those
now.
used to all be in our bedroom, I remember.
Yeah, and we had the really cool bookcase across the top.
well, yeah.
Oh, that was just the best. I had a really big room with a bookcase that we could just put all of my books on, and I loved it. I kept it literature and science and history all together. Anyway, from that, 5-year experience, I gained confidence,
Yeah.
a lot of confidence.
Well, I've seen that over time. You went, well, I guess I didn't look too much at, because you had decided to homeschool.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember you specifically at that point letting out that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't remember you saying that too much, but I have seen you get stronger and more outspoken because you have that confidence since, as the time has gone by.
Yeah. And with the socialization too, we started doing little co-ops, just inviting some friends over and doing
Well, you
some games.
used to, what you called you guys called it the park days.
Yeah, we did
And
park days.
you went and did that at the beginning a lot, and then later not so much. But
Well, when that kid was in the hospital, we couldn't. But before that, we did park days. After that, we did park days. And then we just had 3 families that we met all once a week, and we had a lot of fun working and making
I remembered
principles.
later when actually it was before we were in the basement apartment, when we were in Pleasant Grove, you had that big room where a bunch of you guys got together and did the
we had
plays and
several
stuff.
families come at that time, and we loved the plays. And that's another thing that really got me confident. It was one day I was talking to a man, and he was talking about something about an ounce of blood. And I'm like,
You knew where it came from.
I know exactly what play that's from, right?
Merchant of Venice.
Okay. Very good.
I remember it.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that was it or not, but
And it just sparked just a little tiny thing inside of me, like, oh, I knew that. I wonder how many other people knew that. And I got kind of excited about that. I'm like, hey, maybe I know something now. Maybe I do.
Yeah.
And I started just pondering on this and thinking about it. I'm like, you know what? I know a lot. I could even teach this stuff. and so I did.
Yeah. And so,
Yeah.
well, and you've not only now taught our kids, but other children
Yes.
and moms.
Yeah, well, I started teaching other kids and loving it, but the mothers started coming into the classes and saying, "Hey, we don't know this stuff either. We want to know
Well,
too."
it wasn't.
So that's when I started the mother school.
Well, even when we lived here, I remember you having some moms that said, "Okay, we're not so worried about what the kids are learning."
Yeah.
Because they were teaching them at home, but they wanted to learn what you knew,
Yes.
and they were jealous that their kids were learning it and they weren't.
Yeah. They
So-
were. In fact, I had several mothers stop me as I was driving away from the school, right? They stopped me on the street and said, "Hey, is it all right if we sit in on your classroom?"
I remember you telling me
And
that.
I went, "Absolutely."
Yeah.
So now I do kids and mothers, and that's so much better. Yeah.
Well, and besides, that means the way I see it for you is you're always wanting to reach more people, and that allows you to because you're teaching the moms, but then they're teaching their kids.
Right. Yeah.
And you
And
couldn't
that- and
couldn't
that's
have 50, 60
rich.
kids in the room,
Yeah.
but you can have 10 moms that have 6 kids each.
Yeah.
and take care
Exactly.
of that, so.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And that reaches more people. True. But it also, I love it when a mother will come to me and mentor with me for a few months, and then all of a sudden, oh, I could do this on my own. I'm like, yes,
Yeah.
you know, it helps them. It gives them the confidence that they need to soar on their own.
Well, and sometimes they just need that guidance of one step at a time. And,
Am I doing it the right way?
Yeah.
Am I okay? Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we should have you share.
I think that's
or
pretty
should we
good.
just go right in now?
Yeah.
Okay. So now what are you gonna talk to them about?
So my presentation is going to be on the Greek and the Hebrew methodologies. And it's such a buzzword right now. Like everybody's talking about, I want to learn the difference between Greek
I was
and
surprised.
Roman.
I was surprised how many
Greek and Hebrew.
people in the conference are actually talking about
yeah.
using those two terms.
So many.
I mean, I can think of at least 3 that I've come across as I've been editing, and so
I've been studying the Hebrew language, as you know, for
Right.
2 years, right? But before that, I studied the symbolism, and then before that, I studied numbers, and they mix together just so
and
beautifully.
You've been coming up with a lot of Hebrew. I mean, even since when we started with Institute.
Yes.
When we were first married.
In fact, that's
The
what sparked my interest in it.
From the ritual and symbolism class from John Young. So
Yeah, it's such a treasure.
You've been doing that for quite a while, but
Well, and even in the Isaiah classes, we talked a lot about the different
absolutely.
Hebrew stuff.
you have to.
So, yeah, lots of different ways in how they spoke and how they used the pronouns and how the endings of the words and things like that. That's what, So I've always had an interest.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, always had a thrive to learn. But it was actually Brother Young who taught me, he gave us some stories. And as he taught us the stories of how the Eastern way versus the Western way, we didn't call it Hebrew and Greek at that time,
Right.
but the Eastern way and the Western way. And I was like, whoa, do I do that? Am I like that? You know, and I'll tell you a story in a few minutes about things like that sparked my interest and helped me with that.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, it's going to be about that. But I'm not going to go into the whys. I'm not going to go into the history of it and what happened with the churches and the schools and stuff like that. That's other people can do that. But I want to focus on today. I want to focus just on how. How do you teach a Hebrew principle? How do you teach those Hebrew principles?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, cool. So let's get started then.
All right.
Teach me.
That's great. So, you know probably that the United States was built on 3 methodologies, right? They learned the Greek. They used the Greek language, and that's where we got our language mostly from. We got the laws from the Romans, and because of their empire there, and the religion from the Hebrews.
Right.
Okay, and that's how we built our foundation as a nation.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, we had we took religion out, or we took the Bible out of the schools. And so how do we do it now without the Bible? How do we teach our children? And so that's when I think the Greek mythologies or not mythology, the Greek education methodology started creeping in. And it could have been way before that. I don't know. But
if I remember right, from what you've told me before, is that we started out with the education from a Hebrew.
Yes.
Because we were using the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the different George Wythe and different people had learned. Thomas Jefferson, they certainly had the Bible and
Oh yeah.
Hebrew type.
Well, and you know that homeschooling was so prevalent right then, right?
Right.
You only were homeschooled, and then you got a mentor, and that was who you taught with.
So did this is probably off base, but off of subject, but I'm just trying to understand. So did the school, the little school, one-room schoolhouses and things we see, did that happen more as we expanded westward?
Well, yeah.
Or
it just in time, really, because in the colonial days they were just homeschooled and they were doing, I don't know.
Until they got to
together.
college type level.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, which is actually kind of similar to what I understand. You've told me from Hebrew, where they start out at home, and then they go to the synagogue to learn. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, yeah.
Well, with their fathers. So let's delve in there, right? If you were to imagine with me that you were in the time of Christ, he grew up in the Hebrew culture, right?
Obviously,
he grew up as a Hebrew, and so he was very much into that. So, what is as a baby, as a child, he stayed home with his mother.
Right.
Up until, I don't know, around age 8, 9, 10, somewhere around there. And then he went with his father to his vocation. And he learned the father's vocation. So he became a carpenter just like his father did, right?
Right.
And so that's what you would do if you were in that time period, that you would gain so much knowledge with your mother. And if she knew how to read, she would teach you how to read. If she didn't know how to read, then you didn't learn to read from your mother, but you would definitely learn from your father. Okay. So then the father taught reading. He taught scriptures. He taught them prayer. He taught them how to do the vocation. He taught them everything like right there. And then when they were around 12 and 13 years, that's when they went to synagogue.
Oh, okay.
And that's where they just, learned with the rabbi.
Okay.
So in the scriptures where it talks in Malachi, where it talks about the turning the hearts of the fathers to their children, and turning the children's hearts to their fathers, right? That's like the mother raises them to a certain time period when they're ready, and then he turns them over to their fathers, right?
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's that turning. That's the turning them over to the fathers, because the fathers were the spiritual leaders. Yeah, they taught them their spirituality. They taught them their hands, the working with their hands and with their mind and with their heart. And then they would go home and be nurtured by their mothers.
They would get them to a certain point spiritually. But wouldn't it be the synagogues that finish that? I was just thinking about what, as you were talking about, I was thinking about Christ. And he was around 12 years old, and he goes in the temple, and he is the one that has all this knowledge that they're so surprised he had. So is that because the dads taught him a certain amount, but the synagogue, the elders of the synagogue would have taught them more in depth?
Well, yeah, but see, he's only 12 years old, right? He hasn't gone into synagogue yet.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
That's why they were surprised.
Yeah, that's why they were surprised.
Because Dad taught him a certain amount, but only a certain amount.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So they're like, whoa, how do you know all this
stuff? So it wasn't
just
because, it wasn't just like for us, we read about that and we think, oh, well, he was just so young, he didn't know anything yet. But but they did have certain instruction. It's just that they didn't have... His mother and
his father.
But they didn't have the instruction from the rabbis and whatnot.
Right, exactly. And I personally think probably Heavenly Father was very much involved in his teachings at that time, too.
Yeah, that seems to me.
Yeah. We just don't know.
Well...
But we know.
Well, we know from our... How many experiences do we hear about children even today who they'll be just really spiritual.
Yeah.
And they receive things. I mean, we've had some of our own kids. I know Donna Goff mentions in hers that one son that decided he was going to read from the scriptures because he just, I can't remember what she said, but he felt he must really need to.
Yeah.
And so obviously Christ would be like that.
Right, yeah, yeah. And he must have poured over the scriptures, even though they probably didn't have one at home, but he probably poured over his father's or went into, I don't know.
Yeah,
it's just speculation from here, yeah. Okay. But another thing that they did is when they went to school, and we did this with our kids, if you can recall, we made wooden slates. And my kids have taken theirs, so we don't have them to show you. But we made them wood, and we just made a little handle like this, and then a big square, and we cut them out of particle board, or laminate board, or something. I don't remember.
What they were made of.
Anyway, so and we had the kids paint them. They sawed them. They sanded them. They made them into the slate boards, and then instead of a chalkboard, we just put paper over top of it so that they could write on it. Right. So there they had paper or a chalkboard or something. Anyway. In the Hebrew way was to as soon as their first day of school, they would put honey all over their slate, and they would come into the school with this honey on their slate, and they're like, okay, what do you do with this? And they were supposed to lick it off. Now, do you know why they would lick it off?
No, I have no clue why they would lick.
You don't remember when we did
I don't remember this at all.
Oh, this makes it even better. So they would lick it off so that as an action, the licking was the action, right?
Okay.
And what were they licking from? Their slate, right?
And it's sweet to them?
It was sweet to them. That's why they were teaching, not by just telling them education is going to be great, education is going to be sweet, education is going to, you're going to have hunger for this education. No, they're going to show you how you're actually going to digest this, literally digest.
I do not remember this at all.
That's funny. We put saran wrap all over the slate, and we put honey on it. Okay, well, that's all right.
I don't remember that. I must have been at work at that time.
Yeah, you probably were. Anyway, so they licked it off, right? And it was because the licking needs action. Right. And in education, in order to educate, to be educated, to receive that education inside you, takes action from the person. Another thing that the Hebrews did, it's really, really great, is that they taught in their relationships. They taught the kids and the boys specifically how to think in their relationships. So imagine with me, you're a little boy.
Okay.
And you're like sitting in the garage and you've got a hammer. You've borrowed your dad's hammer without asking. And you're down there hammering and hitting and just working. And your dad hears it and he comes in. Now, if it was the Western way or the Greek way, what do you think a father would say?
They come running in and say, stop banging the whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
Stop hitting that with a hammer. Don't ruin the hammer or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Don't ruin the hammer. I told you never to do this.
Don't
Don't break my stuff, or be careful with my stuff, or things like that, right? But if it was a Jewish man to going in there, he would say something almost exactly opposite. Not quite, but opposite. He says,
remembering this now.
Yeah, you remember hearing this from Brother Young, right? Yeah, he said, now a wise boy would be very careful with his father's things.
Yeah.
And then turned around and walked away.
Or wasn't it, I'm sorry, but it just, to me, it was something like, would be 10 times more careful with his father's things than his own, or something like that.
Yeah.
But all of those are ways.
Mm-hmm.
All those are ways that you might.
A wise child will be, what did you say there?
10 times more careful.
10 times more careful, yeah. Mm-hmm.
With their his father's tools or his father's possessions than his own.
Yeah. So can you see the difference there? Like,
yeah,
there's a huge difference, right?
Well, it makes you have to think.
That's the clue. Yeah.
It doesn't just give you,
or the key.
It doesn't just tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you an idea. I don't know how to say it. How do you say that? It gives, as you're saying something like that, it's saying, okay, so as a child, I would have to think, okay, if I'm wise, then I'm more careful, right? Yeah. Then I'm going to be more careful with my father's things. So I need to be careful with this. And then I'd start wondering if hitting...
Is my dad's tools more important than my tools? All these kinds of questions start.
Well, and it's not saying, okay, so to me, it's not saying you're bad for doing this. Mm-hmm. It's saying if you want to be wise, then you're going to act differently.
Right.
And so,
my dad wants me to be wise, I think, because he just asked me to be wise by telling me that I was a wise boy.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So the other one, the Greek way, was stop doing what you're doing, or be careful with my stuff. You're telling exactly what to do. Exactly. It's telling the child everything, all the answers. But this other way makes the child think.
But see, and one of the things I remember about this was Brother Young pointed out to us that if I'm the Greek-minded parent and I'm going in there and saying, don't hit the table with the hammer, then the child may go and hit the door with a hammer or the window and break it or anything else. And then...
Because he was too specific, right?
Then Dad comes in. Yeah. Then I come in as Dad and say, I told you not to break things. No. Yeah. I told you not to hit the table with a hammer.
Yeah.
As opposed to, if I'm again back to the Hebrew child or Jewish child, I'm thinking, okay, I'm more careful here. And so I'm going to think about, okay, I might experiment because I might hit a stone with it. Yeah. Or I might hit a plank. But I'm going to be cautious when I'm doing it.
Because I want to be that wise child.
I know that glass is more fragile than these things, I'm not going to hit the window.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I hit a plank, I'm going to discover it makes dents in the wood, and I'm not going to hit something else with wood.
Yeah.
That's wood with it.
Mm-hmm. And another thing is the boy feels like he's being obedient hitting the window with the Greek method, right? He's like, I'm not hitting the table, so I'm being obedient.
Well,
and he feels like he's an
we
obedient
hear that
child
all the time.
Yeah.
You hear, I mean, examples like that, and we make fun of those examples.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's TV sitcoms all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and then we make fun. We make fun of the kid for how can he not know?
Yeah.
And then at the same time, then we make fun of the parent for not being more specific, actually.
Yeah, so you can't hit dot, 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 dot.
My goodness, it'll take all day to tell them not to do that.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, or they'll just say, put it away. Mm-hmm. And now you can't touch it. Now you never learn about it.
Right, yeah. And you never get to. And you become curious about it later.
Because I don't remember my dad doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we lived in various places like the farm and whatnot, where I experimented, and that's how I learned.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago, my dad at one point said, "I'll never be able to do the things you can do on a handy things in a home." Because you've experimented with all these things, you did it,
and he hadn't
ever experimented with it. I mean, he had tools, but he didn't even know how to use them really.
Yeah.
I mean, technically he knew how to hit a hammer, but how did I learn? I learned by experimentation.
Yeah.
And
your dad allowed that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Great, right?
I mean, and the experience was around me. So yeah, I learned a lot from the different experimentation and everything. So obviously, if you're teaching from that Hebrew way, it allows you to learn about it, even though, and not just, you never learn about something because you were told never to touch something.
Yeah.
Like never touch a bug. I'm thinking about your little
my
kids.
Scout class, yeah. So just to reiterate that, right? My Scout class, I've always taught Scouts for 20 years now.
Forever now.
And I love teaching Scouts. And my boys love dirt. They love bugs. They love everything outdoors.
They were always outdoors.
Yeah, they were always outdoors. So I get this new group from this new house that we're living in, and and I had 4 little boys, and I'm like, great, this will be great. We'll go outside and we'll just go around the neighborhood and we'll look at leaves and we'll look at bugs and we'll look at everything. And I go up to a bug and they're like, oh, it's a bug. It's a bug. And I'm like, yeah, it's a bug. Now, and I held it in my hand and they're like, oh, you're holding it in your hand. You're holding it. And I'm like, wow, what has happened to this generation? And, it just goes on from there. They didn't want to. They didn't understand leaves. They didn't
a feather.
They were petrified of the feather because it might carry germs, and they didn't want to. What was it? Look through the magnifying glass at an ant, and I mean, just all kinds of things they didn't want to do. So I'm just so very surprised. We've got to let our boys experiment.
They hadn't experimented.
They did not experiment with things outside,
because
and
they were just told
lost
no.
it. Yeah, probably. Or just didn't have that opportunity. We're too busy doing other things or something. We've got to just let them be bored. Because when they get bored, they start experimenting and start looking and start observing. Yeah.
Well, that's one thing that you and I have always done is we've never felt it was our responsibility to entertain them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. And in fact, we have the board list, right?
Right.
If they come to us with the board name, they go to the board chart and have to choose a chore. So yeah, that's how we work in that family, because they if they're bored, they can find something to do.
Yeah.
And it's great to learn how to find something to do. So it's super important. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's review.
All right.
Learning the Greek way doesn't teach you how to think, right? But the Hebrew, it just tells you what to do.
What to do, yeah.
What to do. But the Hebrew way teaches you, doesn't say, this is what you do, this is a do, this is a don't, this is a do, right? It basically tells you how to think. And that's that's a big difference.
Yeah.
How to think, right? And the other one is how to ask questions. That's another thing. My boys weren't asking questions in my scouting class. They were just like, no. And I'm like, oh, I am changing this.
I remember you coming home and saying that. You said, this is not going to go on.
This is not going to happen anymore. And we did. We get dirty. And my boys learned how to get dirty, man. They did. Anyway, so learning to ask questions, learning to be curious. And that's another thing that our Greek methodology that we're using currently in our whole society, not just in public schools, but in homeschooling too, is that we're taking away their curiosity. We're just telling them the answers.
Well,
right?
or telling them, okay, you have to figure this out, but in
these parameters.
Well, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
This is how you figure something out.
Now go work the problem a couple times.
Do it a bunch of times. Well, not a couple. It's
well,
like 100 times or some crazy thing.
Instead of getting them to think and to reason and to relate it to themselves, right? They need that. They're hungry for it. But when it's been stifled and stifled and stifled so many times, they just, all right, tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Yeah. And they forget. Or they don't want to do it anymore. So that's thing. So getting them to think, that's the first thing. Getting them to question, getting them to ask questions. Remember the father that told him, a wise boy. Mm-hmm. Well, what's a wise boy? Do I want to be that wise boy? Right? They're starting to think. And what would I do
if, how would I, they'd ask, how would I be more careful?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. The other thing that the Hebrews do is they teach the language of symbolism. And they do that from a very, very young age. So when I was taking a gematria class, which is numbers in Hebrew, mm-hmm. I learned a great, wonderful story. So I'd like to share that with you.
Okay.
So it's a Hebrew rabbi, and he's got several little kids, and he wants them to learn the alphabet. He wants them to learn how to read. He wants them to learn everything about education. So he hires a tutor to come in and teach them. And she's kind of nervous, like, it's a rabbi. I don't know. Where do you want me to start? That's her first question. Where do you want me to start? And he looks at her and he goes, I want you to start with Aleph. Now, Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, mm-hmm. right? It's the letter A for us. It's an Aleph. And she goes, okay. And then she goes, oh, okay. She got it. Because she understood, as a Hebrew woman, she understood how to teach the Hebrew language. Because it's not, I'm going to start with the letter A and you're going to learn all the sounds that make A make, and you're going to learn all the things that start with an A. No, that's not how they taught. They taught the symbolism behind that letter. Now, I'm going to attempt to teach it to you, okay?
Right.
So she started with the letter Aleph. Now, the cursive way of Aleph, it's really flowery and really beautiful, but basically...
really hard to read because it's almost always really tiny.
Well, okay. But if you were to enlarge it, it looks... Basically, it's made of a line and 2 dots. Okay? So I'll show you, this is how they draw it. If you were just to write it out, it looks like this.
Right.
Okay? Now, the symbolism in it is it's a line with a dot on the top and a dot on the bottom. So in other words, it's made with 2 other letters of the alphabet, a vav and 2 yods. Okay, so a yod is usually represented with a dot, or can be represented with a dot, and a line is represented, the vav is usually represented by a line, okay? So she takes this line and the dot, and she says, all right, boys and girls, or whatever she's teaching, the little kids, and she says, this is how we're going to start. What do you think this represents? And she's looking at here. What do you think this represents? What could that line represent? And then she says the line is the number 6. It's also...
Because it's a vav.
Because it's a vav, yeah.
Okay.
It's also representation of the scriptures. Or the scrolls. You remember how they would roll up the scrolls and they rolled them up? And they had a line, right?
It was like a stick or a line.
It was a stick, yeah. And that's how they have the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph, right? Those are the scrolls, those lines. And that's what the vav is,
and
that
that's what
line.
the scripture would be on,
Mm-hmm.
so therefore, okay, so it represents
right, so it represents a line. Now the dots represent several different things. One, it represents God, or the Godhead. It represents individual groups or nations, and it represents individual people. Okay? So here's what she taught. She goes, this is God. He's up in heaven, up high. And he wants to talk to us down on earth, down here. So he
uses the scriptures.
So he goes through the scriptures to teach to us. See how that line goes on like that? He goes through the scriptures to teach us. So that whole story happened because of one letter in the alphabet.
Right.
Right? Isn't that beautiful?
So this is...
Their symbolism in the English language. I looked this up just so that I could be able to tell you.
Okay.
Okay. The English language has, let's see right here, it's 1,250,109.8. I don't know how the 0.8 gets in there. Words in the English language currently as of 2014.
Yeah, I don't know how they have.
I don't know either, but that's what it looks. That's what they did, and so 1 million, right? 1 million words in English
sure
language.
I don't know that many.
You sure? You're probably not. So, but there is in the Hebrew language, there's 45,000. That's it.
Yeah, that's a lot different.
There's a huge difference between that. Because when in the English language, when we want to learn something new, we add a new word. And add a new word, and add a new word, and add a new word, right? To try to describe something. But the Hebrews don't. The Hebrew language is symbolic, and they weave it into and make it beautiful by creating the symbolism. Oh, let's use this little symbolism and this little symbolism, and then create a new word. Oh, we don't need that. And the Latins did this too. Let's take this word and take this word and put them together,
right?
Like telephone, telegraph, or Philadelphia, right? They would put words together.
What are words coming from now? Is it just made up something?
Yeah. Where does computer come from?
Well, I always thought it was because the general original computer was computing something.
Okay. Yeah. So it's an action, right? We get it from an action. They get it from meaning, feelings.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool, huh? All right, so this is why the Hebrew language, so that we've got thinking, like teaching you how to think.
Right.
We have learning how to ask good questions. We're learning about symbolism, the language of symbolism within everything. You don't have to know the Hebrew alphabet or the Hebrew language to teach symbolism, because we can teach symbolism in everything. I remember taking our children and going for a walk and saying, okay, in the MTC, you remember how we were learning a language? What's that in Dutch? What's that in Dutch? What's that in Dutch? Right? Well, I got the idea when I was teaching my kids. So how does that relate to God? How does that relate to Christ? Does that relate to you? How does that, right? I was just pointing everything out. And we'd just talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. So the boys loved it, right? The boys loved it. And the younger kids love it too. We get to talk about light bulbs or anything that were around us, and they know how to liken it to themselves and to the scriptures and to everything.
I think even though we teach a lot in regular schools and even in homeschools, a lot of just this is that and that is the other, and don't do a lot of symbolism on purpose.
Well, thinking, yeah.
I think it seems to me when we're talking about these things, we know symbolism. Like,
absolutely.
we really do know it.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
If you see a logo that has a light bulb, you know that probably has something to do with ideas. We have different things in our society that we use symbolism with.
Yeah.
I mean, just any logo really is
or
that.
A check mark on a shoe means Nike.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
even something like that.
Or whatever they have. But how is it we get so afraid of symbolism then?
Well, that's a whole new box to open up,
Okay,
right?
sorry.
That's okay. But I think that we're afraid of symbolism because it's, well, two reasons. One, it could be sacred, and we shouldn't talk about sacred things that we talk in the church.
Or we
and
get it
another
wrong.
or that we could get it wrong. Maybe we're not confident in it. That could be another reason. And I think another reason is that, it could be a bad symbol. Or a devil symbol, right? I grew up in New Mexico, where the capital of devil worshiping, and there was tons of symbols every time, and we had to know the difference between a devil worshiping symbol and a Christ worshiping symbol, and what was the difference and why, and then where did they come? And since then I've been curious of where they come from and things like that. But yeah, the symbols can be bad, but for everything there is a good and a bad, everything. And we've got to recognize that and focus on the good. If we hide from all of it, we're not going to recognize or learn anything.
Right.
We've got to recognize the good and understand the evil too. It's the opposition in all things. We've got to understand it and see the good for what it is, so then we can make the correct choice.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a big answer.
I know, and it was kind of a side thing, but it's still related. So
yeah. All right, so let's review again.
About.
What the first thing is, it gets
How
them
to
to think.
Thinking.
And the second one, it helps them to ask questions.
Right.
The third, it teaches them the language of symbolism and how to utilize it, how to liken it to themselves. Yeah. And the fourth way is it teaches them principles of the gospel, true principles. And principles, there can be good and bad too, right? There's false principles and false doctrine.
Absolutely.
There's also rich truth and of principles. And so you got to recognize both of them and teach the truth. Okay? So in the Hebrew, so as I'm teaching this, as you know, I've been teaching this for 10 years.
Yeah, right.
Right, and teaching the difference between principles and doctrines, and teaching them how to create their own applications. And as I'm doing this, I remember one time I was at a teaching at one of our Keystone events, and I taught the difference between doctrines, principles, and applications. And the lady came up to me. Do you remember? She said, "Wow, I have taught the principle approach the whole time for all of these years. I didn't realize I was supposed to hook them to the doctrine."
Oh, yeah.
And she goes,
I don't remember her saying that, but
yeah, it was so sad. I came home and just thought about that for so long, because we can teach principles all day long, because there are true principles, there are factual principles, there's all types of different principles. And they're just principles, but until we can take that principle that we're studying and hook it to a gospel doctrine, a true, pure gospel doctrine, it's just education, right? Yeah. It's just facts, it's just knowledge, until we can hook it to that, to God or to the plan of salvation. Another thing that you can hook it to, President Packer always says, hook it to the plan of salvation. But another one that you can hook it to, and this President Hunter always said this, was to hook it to who you are. Know the Abrahamic covenant and know who you belong to. And he says, with those two things, knowing the plan and knowing the Abrahamic covenant, you can hook everything to those things. You can hook everything to that. Yeah. But until you make that connection and help the children connect it, it's lost. It's really sad. So that put me on a journey, a thinking question, right? Like, wow, so if people are just teaching principles and they're not hooking them to the doctrine, how can I help them? How can we get this out to help them? Hook it to the plan, hook it to the gospel doctrine. And so I came up with, and just a few months ago, a simple way of doing it is just with a picture. You take a picture and you hang up a picture and you ask the kids about it. And you get their curiosity going. And then I have underneath, so I've created these, I've created posters. Right. And one with a picture, and then underneath it is what the picture is, a doctrine that it hooks to, and that it could hook to, because you could hook it to a different doctrine if you need to, right? It doesn't have to be that one. In fact, the more you get the child involved in it, the better, and the way they understand it, then they'll learn it better.
Right.
So my thought was, okay, so where do we start? What kind of principle should we start with?
Do you remember? Oh, I know this one. Yeah.
So I remember you came home and I said, I've got this idea, but I want to start at the beginning. And the beginning is a point, right? So I'm going to give these people a dot on their wall. How crazy is that going to be? Anyway, so we came up with other ideas, and we started with the...
but it's still technically we're representing a dot.
Yeah, we're starting at the beginning.
Even though it might be something else.
Right, so we are starting with a point, yeah. And I'm going to teach you in just a few minutes that about what that principle is going to be, and it's one of the principles of the point.
Right.
So I'm starting with geometric shapes, and the principles that go with that. So we're starting with a point, we're starting with a circle, and with the number 1, and what does the number 1 represent? So you're going to be learning how to get curious. You're going to be learning how to get thinking, because I have thinking questions on there too. And just the picture by themselves are going to create curiosity. It's going to get you to answer questions and ask questions. There are questions provided, but there are questions. And that you're going to start asking, and then you're going to start getting curious about them. And it's also going to teach you symbolism, and it's going to teach you principles and how they hook to doctrines. Well, so in all 5 of those areas, you'll get everything with this poster.
So what I'm remembering is that with that poster, you said you have you have a question or two underneath it, but then you are also asking what else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What else does this, right? So it's a point of the North Star and everything going around it. So it's a time-lapse photo of the stars. And so you see everything creating a circle around that one star.
Right.
So what else does that?
Right.
What else circles a point? And of course, there's lots of answers.
Oh my goodness. And, you know, even starting out, if you're going to start out with anybody, you can even start out with a 3-year-old.
Oh, absolutely.
Because there's a song
Okay.
that everyone always, little kids sing all the time. The wheels on the bus go round.
Oh,
right?
Beautiful, Tom. I had not thought about that one.
So that, even a 3-year-old
Very
can
nice.
come up with stuff that...
The axle's holding the wheel that
That's
goes
right.
round and round. Yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of different, lots
So that's
and lots
where
of different
my
ones.
level is a 3-year-old.
That's all right. That's all right. You taught me everything you know. I know, whatever. Anyway, so that's what I want to show. I want to show our audience about how to make it simple. They don't have to use mine, heaven's sakes, no. But just putting up a picture that teaches a principle. And I have to just say, a principle is not a one word, right? The word value or the word happiness or the word honesty are not principles.
So
those are values.
Okay, so you brought it up.
Okay.
And I wouldn't know how to say it, so I'm going to ask you, how do you explain what a principle is based on that?
Okay.
So kind of what is a principle?
Great question.
If it's not a one-word thing, and a one-word thing is more of a value, then how do I take it and make it into a principle?
Most principles will fit into an if-then statement. But you're not going to hear over the pulpit, if you do this, then this is going to happen, right? So they take the if-then out and they create a statement. So principles are always statements that usually have a promise. The if part is what you can do, you physically. That's the action, right? It's the licking off of the honey. And the then is what God's going to give you. And that's God's in charge of the then.
Or
right?
what's not going to happen.
Because
the one I'm thinking of is wickedness never was happiness.
Mm-hmm. So what's the if-then statement with that? That's an axiom, right? That's many principles.
So
if axioms.
if I'm wicked, I'm not going to have happiness.
Exactly. That's an if-then statement, right? You were able to put it into an if-then statement. Right. Yeah. And is God going to provide that?
If-then statement.
Oh, yeah.
Part, so.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, that's a principle. And I have a whole chapter on that in the how-to manual. I've written all the things about principles in that how-to manual.